I do. I enjoyed Doug's program so much. I was going to wind up in situations trying to follow programs like that. It's been a while since I've seen Doug, and the days when you actually had live participants in the original Everett free speech fight to talk to, it seems maybe like we dreamed it. You know, Jack Miller and the people of that generation, fortunately, were recorded by Stu Bird and Deborah Schaffer in the Wobblies documentary. So even some of it comes on so clearly, even across cinema. All of them are gone now, but amazing people, amazing stories to tell. And I think some of the challenge, come on, let's face it, we were laughing the other day with some media people about after we've been doing this for 40 years, pretending to the public that there's going to be a new angle on the Everett Massacre. There should be some sort of penalty for that. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I make sure I was out of town when I was out there. But the fact is that always the challenge with this, because you see we're using materials that were done, in many cases the most powerful statements about this were made 100 years ago. Things were very different 100 years ago. Things were very complicated in different sorts of ways. Things that they took for granted in the meanings of things they were saying or the images they were using, they're different. So what you're really looking for is something that qualifies, I think, as kind of some of the higher levels of art. You're looking for some kind of meaning in this that touches you or touches people now in a way similar, hopefully, to what people might have experienced at the time. That it can't just mean nothing. And I would have to confess that might be the conclusion you would reach. Some of the people in this room have spent many weeks and months and years studying this because it sticks in your craw that it could mean nothing. That in fact what it was two disparate groups battling it out, and the result was a disaster for both of them. And if you come to that conclusion, boy, I don't think I would maybe argue with you. But on the other hand, over the years, Margaret and I talked to an awful lot of very elderly gentlemen who lived the rest of their lives after 1916, believing that those IWW died for them. Dr. Clark used to argue with me about this, but the fact is, I would insist, if a person lived his life believing that a group with a set of beliefs had actually laid down their lives for him, and as a result of that, his life was drastically better, and he had an example of courage that inspired him for the rest of his life, then it did have importance. The Wobblies and what they did in Everett in 1916 did not change the working conditions in the mills or in the camps. It didn't affect that. What affected that was a pernicious sort of pattern of war and greed and economy and industrial intelligence and stupidity and a whole complex woof of things that are not nearly as satisfying as the idea that people faced death so that you wouldn't have to suffer humiliation and social injustice. And that's what the Wobblies were saying. But then we're talking about a free speech fight. Okay, come on, what kind of free speech is worth getting beaten up for or killed? And the fact is, they seem to have said that they knew, that they were willing at a certain point to die or to be beaten senseless for what they believed in. And irresistible. I can't resist that. I want to look in those faces and understand where they got the courage to live the life that they believed they needed to live. Because we all need that, right? We all need to believe that we have the courage to be able to face the things that put our consciences and our senses of humanity at risk. And they seem to be doing that. Now, about the time they carved IWW across the forehead of some poor sap who's trying to ride a freight and toss him off into a slough somewhere because he's not a member of their organization, I got to stop and think, hold it, folks. There's a whole layer of romanticism here that maybe we also have to penetrate if we're going to fairly deal with a radical movement that was threatening to burn mills or blow up steam engines or stick spikes in logs so that people would be killed by the shrapnel. All those are the other sides of the reality, which was industrial frontier extractive industry when it was its most nightmarish. You have to remember that there was an industrial commission traveling the United States during those years, just before the Everett Massacre, going from town to town, trying to talk to labor and managers of what the hell is going on. You're having strikes that result in mass violence. You're having people are injured and killed on the job in such a regular. Children are winding up in factories before they've had a childhood. There was a crisis in 1915 and 16, and it was about to get marginalized by an international conflict. Isn't it amazing how war then sort of distracts everybody, and the social justice that everybody was arguing about then suddenly gets put on the sidetrack, and we'll come back to it. After we've won this war against the forces of evil, after we've stood up for everything that's right and just and freedom in the world, then we'll come back and we'll deal with these people who are starving to death or don't even have roofs over the heads of their children. Those delays always seem to come at just the right break, so that you don't get the reform you really need, you don't get the changes, you don't get the compassion that we should, right on the framework we built, be able to be capable of. And one thing I discovered right off was that it was never a fair fight. You know, if you're looking at the guy who just dropped off the underside of a freight train to come to Everett to get beaten up and thrown in jail for the issue of free speech for his class, for the working class, against who? The guy with the cigars and the brandy in the penthouse of his mansion over here on the bayfront? Okay, what's his fare? No. The guy in the penthouse is going to get beaten senseless because the Wobblies were geniuses. I'm going to show you some examples of the graphic art that they did. And after 100 years, it's powerful stuff. It's funny stuff. The individuals who were doing this were using art to express themselves. Free speech may or may not mean much under normal day-by-day circumstances, but when it is practiced as fluently and as powerfully as the IWW were doing it, you better be afraid of it. Now, the people who oppose the Wobblies in Everett, those guys are the villains. They'll always be the villains, so they can't dig their way out. Don McRae, arch fiend from hell. He's a guy who got elected in 1912 with the rest of the progressives. Cleaned up the jail, treated prisoners better than anybody ever had. But the local labor press called him the best sheriff Snohomish County had ever had. Lots of luck with that now. Sheriff McRae was a fiend, and as it turned out, all those things the Wobblies wished upon him in the way of a curse seem to have occurred. Why? Because they were poets and they were painters. If you're going to take a side in this for posterity's sake, stand over there by the guy who knows how to sing a song that's going to make you cry. We don't have anybody in here that would do that too, but anyway. But notwithstanding, a poet who can move you with words that 100 years after he wrote them on the wall of a jail in Chicago. Oh, that's somebody to be reckoned with. That really is. They took all those people and shipped those people off to Leavenworth Penitentiary. Those people were systematically made political prisoners of the United States government using alien and sedition laws that have been on the books since the very beginning. And who wins? Well, truth doesn't always win, because what you do if you create heroes and villains, all the really interesting stuff in the middle all gets lost. If you're just looking for white hats and black hats, next week is your week. 135 years since the gunfight at the OK Corral. Celebrate that. Don't celebrate what happened in Everett. Everett is an example of mistakes. It's an example of complex relationships between individuals who were never going to be able to really talk to each other like normal human beings, and as a result, we're going to wind up shooting at each other under circumstances that were, the nicest thing you can say about it, stupid. The first work of art I think that really stopped me in my tracks about Everett was the result of the work of the top guys on this list. I just picked 5, and there are a whole lot more than 5. And these 5 are not well documented. Each one of these gentlemen was a remarkably talented, gifted individual who left a record of things, sometimes large, sometimes just 1 or 2 works of art related to Everett, that help us remember help us think we remember what it was about. Yeah. I love the one that we use all the time, says, "We never forget." How, how do you never forget something that you didn't experience? What you're doing is you're thinking you want to remember the importance of what happened, the meaning of what happened. And these guys were all, in their own way, I think, geniuses. I think the first of them was a gentleman that for years was never quite sure what to make of his name scrawled on a work of art that appeared almost immediately after the Everett Massacre. Morris Pass was a Russian Jew who came here as a little boy in poverty with his parents, who was always an artist from the time he was little. And he had plans to go to the New York Art Institute, the art student suite there in Manhattan, where all manner of artists were trained, and that was what he wanted to do. He was 21 years old when the Everett Massacre happened, and he created the single piece of work that, to me, is one of the most memorable works of propaganda art that's ever been produced. But he was not who you'd necessarily expect. Morris was, well, you could tell looking at his face. The guy had been in a few fights by the time he was 20 or 21. But very strong beliefs about what the role of the working man was. You realize the Russian Revolution was going on in the other side of the world at the time that all these events leading up to Everett were happening. Bolshevik becoming a part of the American vocabulary. We're talking about anarchists, and we're talking about nuances of socialism that people are frightened of, burning bombs in the hands of little anarchist cartoon characters running around through the newspapers. And Morris Pass and his brother Joseph were Russian Jews who were trying to find their way in a country that they arrived in as children. The very month of the Everett Massacre, Morris created something that appeared on the front page of the Industrial Worker. Let me read the words, because the words are important. Workers, remember your dead. In memory of Felix Barron, Hugo Gerlich, Gus Johnson, John Looney, and Abe Rabinowitz. Murdered by the master class in Everett, Washington on Sunday, November 5th, 1916. They died fighting for free speech. They gave up their lives in the struggle of our class for freedom. They are dead, but their deeds live on. Look at the image. Grieving workers against a really troubled sky. They just lost 5 of their number. An amazing, amazing piece of work. Almost immediately, the IWW decided to use the martyrdom aspect to full effect. So in a very short order, they had plaster death masks done of all 5 of the official IWW dead that resulted from the Everett Massacre. You see their faces across the top as if they're flowers blooming, as if somehow or the other their deaths and their immortality as works of art or artifacts was their destiny. A couple at the bottom kneeling. Flowers that are the world, but also the symbol of the IWW, surrounding the outside edge of a magnificent lithograph. It seems to have had enormous importance at the time. The Everett Wobbly office at 1115 Hewitt, they were hanging out a banner that you're probably all aware that the song being sung by the IWW when they arrived in Everett on the Verona was P.P. Bliss's hymn, Hold the Fort, when the English transport workers had changed the lyrics a little bit so that what we were talking about was labor and not the forces of the Antichrist. But if you look across the banner that says Holding the Fort in Everett, also the office dog over there on one side. But right smack in the middle is a copy of Morris Pass's lithograph in the hands of, these were distributed in large numbers and of course appeared on the front page of the Industrial Worker newspaper. Well, as his reward for having so effectively done a lithograph eulogy for the 5 IWW dead from Everett, he and his brother were headed back east. As I mentioned, real ambition was to get to New York, and get himself into art school, as if he looking at the piece of work at the age of 21, thinking, I'm not so sure he needed much schooling at that point, but they were arrested for failing to comply with the draft law of the day. Both Morris and his brother Joseph did 2 years in McNeil Island Penitentiary for refusing to serve in the war. They didn't even refuse to serve. Actually, they had signed up, but there was confusion over their registration date. My own grandfather didn't sign up for the draft until 2 years after the war was over. He went up to Canada and worked on a farm and came back down and said, oops, I think somebody got lost. These people were earmarked because they were considered dangerous. And if you look at Workers Remember Your Dead, you know exactly why they were dangerous. These people were eloquent people expressing viewpoints that made them a political danger to the existing political realities in America. I love this picture. That's Morris in the upper right-hand corner there. He's posed in this picture. He's got his dog in there. He's got his shoes down by the stove down below. Anyway, but after he got out of, it's funny, it's almost like a cartoon image of, as soon as they let him out of jail, he just scooted right on back to the Big Apple and got himself into an enclave in Greenwich Village. A lot of Russian Jews in New York City in those days, and he fell right in with a group of radical artists who were painters and poets, and he lived the rest of his life in a group of people who loved him, and vice versa, in Greenwich Village. And I'm happy to have heard that, but I'm disappointed to see that only old lefties and radicals know about Morris Pass. Morris Pass, especially with just one piece of work in Everett, I think, is a vivid part of the living memory of what the Everett Massacre was about. And the IWW's intention to remember the names of the individuals who gave up their lives and to transmit a message through art that communicated to the average individual. Sometimes art is used to distinguish the really smart and really wealthy people from the rest of us. Sometimes art is used to directly communicate with where we live. And Morris Pass was, at the age of 21, already a master of hitting us right exactly where we live. An amazing piece of work. And we've been using it without really crediting it off and on. Matter of fact, a couple of high school students not too long ago claimed credit for it when they published a report. Another guy that amazed me, I discovered some of these things, you find out about them in the strangest way. Leland Stanford Chumley was born not too far from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Large family, dead father, mother trying to raise a whole bunch of kids. He was working in a laundry by the time he was a teenager trying to support the family. Multi-talented guy, a gifted writer of tracts on, for instance, among other things, the need for labor unions in cleaning establishments and places like that. But he was also a fairly talented guy with a pen. And from a very early date, you see pictures by Lee Chumley, Leland S. Chumley, in publications by the IWW. 1915, of course, see, that the centenary of this seems to have gotten by me, I know, without what I feel probably should have been proper observance. But the execution of Joe Hill was a major event in the history of the IWW. And one of the things that Leland Chumley did was to make this beautiful portrait of Hill that appeared in the International Socialist Review, a beautiful piece of portrait work that was done the year before the Everett situation. With his little signature down, Chumley, right on the chest of the songster, the man who left us so many memorable things, transmogrified out of church music and turned into anthems for the labor movement. But the one that we all remember, and I don't know, this has been associated with the Everett Massacre observed here in Everett since the 1970s. Another example of superb graphics that ran in the Industrial Worker, like Pass's eulogy. This was in the pages of the Industrial Worker when it was published in Seattle. Wonderful piece of work. Lee Chumley was a very gifted graphic artist, as well as being a polemicist and being an organizer of restaurant workers and laundry workers. And this is, I can't use the word icon because everybody uses it, but it is. This is the image that you find enshrined in people's homes or inside their notebooks, the one that they associate with the idea. And of course, again, it promulgates that problematic concept. We never forget. Well, that was okay for the people who did this piece of work and the people who were at the time. But how do we not forget something we didn't experience, especially something as complex and intricate as the events that led up to November 5th, 1916, and for that matter, led away from November 5th, 1916. You see that Everett depicted as a dark mob with their guns out there bristling, waiting to get the drop on the Verona. Do you remember that it was the Wobblies who embraced the idea of massacre, as the way of describing this? The Wobblies were interested in maximizing the concept of martyrdom, were interested in the event being viewed as a pre-planned attempt by the master class to exterminate them. Massacre being like a predetermined pogrom, something that's going to sort of a ethnic cleansing program by the local government here to take them out of action. And while there's not really a great deal of evidence to that effect, it's things like this that help promote that idea. You see the Verona pulling in to Everett Harbor, about to be ambushed by a bunch of Brett mobsters. One of them is so nasty, especially because recently with the beheadings idea has been decapitation has only relatively recently made its re-entry into the media, but this is one that I always hesitated to use when we're talking to kids about what happened in November of 1916. Here you see Everett as an ape with a sword or a spear on which are impaled, dripping the heads of the individuals who were shot on the Verona. At the same time, this great kind of muscular figure with the murdering of our fellow workers must cease, like a Colossus of Rhodes. The boat is sort of sailing in somehow. This monument, the Verona, the wobbly battleship. Well, at this point, it must be sailing back out, right? But anyway, strong stuff. Again, the work of Leland, Sanford, Chumley. And of course, some of this stuff that doesn't directly relate to Everett, but directs itself to the sorts of issues that the Wobblies were perpetually bringing up in street speaking and in their propaganda art, was sabotage. Sabcat, a black cat, represents sabotage. The wooden shoe, the sabbat, would be thrown into the works that would damage the factories where people worked, cause mayhem in the workplace. This one is especially powerful because, that looks like it could be Everett down below there, right? But by this time, he was not actually working in Everett at the time. Loved the cat. Sometimes it was a cartoon cat. It was almost comical, but Chumley's 1917 Sab cat, this one is not to be messed with. I have a black cat. It sometimes does that. When it does that, you don't mess with it. See by his back leg back there, it says Chumley directly under his rear leg back there. But Leland Chumley was not destined to become, or so it's not right, he didn't live a very long life. He died at the age of 50. In the 1920s, he like Morris Pass, found his way to Greenwich Village. He'd been to the Pacific Northwest and decided that someplace else might be better. In Washington Square, Greenwich Village had absorbed, of course, more than its share of American artists and intelligentsia, and Chumley wound up being a cornerstone of Greenwich Village history. Some of you may have visited Chumley's in Greenwich Village. It had a bad accident about a decade ago that caused a lot of work to have to be done to the building to reopen it. But Chumley's still exists. And over the years that Chumley's existed, well, he opened it in 28 and he died in 1935. So his involvement was not extremely long, but even during that time, all manner of prominent American authors were habitués of Chumley's or had parties there when books appeared. You see the plaque that stands in Chumley's credits Willa Cather, E. Cummings, Theodore Dreiser, William Faulkner, Ring Lardner, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Eugene O'Neill, John Dos Passos, John Steinbeck. Like I say, if you visit Chumley's back in the day, you might see one of these writers actually in a booth working on something, or look at the walls where they have, even today, the book covers of things that were published by those people, and they had parties, the celebrations of the appearance of books in Chumley's. As I said, it had a bad accident. It's been recently reopened after a major rebuilding. You know that phrase 86 something, that actually originated with Chumley's. Because Chumley's has no signage on the outside. And having been started right in the teeth of the Volstead Act years, to 86 something was to go out the 86 number door that fed out into Bedford, I believe it is, that's off the one side of the building. So that's to get out the side door before the cops came in, the other door. That's where that 86 thing originated, was the Chumley's Restaurant and Bar in Greenwich Village. Chumley is, well, I've never found a photograph of Chumley. The restaurant had a questionable image that looked like the wrong. The boxing commissioner that was with the picture couldn't possibly have been it. He wasn't around at that time. Anyway, so we're still looking for a really good portrait of Lee Chumley. We don't even have the basic data about this guy by the name of I. Svensson, who was a Scandinavian who worked for years and years in political cartooning in Seattle. And what we know about him is that he left one of the most memorable pieces of political cartooning about Everett that has ever been done. We figured what his real root must have been Macbeth, but it's one that you need some time to really look at and study. Here he has Everett as a blood-stained dowager being catered to by, well, one guy there, that's an Everett industrial tyrant. In the background are gunmen, thugs. The Everett Tribune is making sure that they've got some of the blood stains off, and that she's wearing her fur coat. A capitalist whitewash press and a huge bucket down there in the middle. And just in terms of cast, this one has to be unusual, depending on whether or not you count the 74 IWW defendants in jail and the 5 out buried up above. But Primp and Prime, they can't efface the bloody stain is a memorable piece of perhaps a little bitter political art that appeared in the Industrial Worker not that long after the event. It was actually just some of the work that he did. Well, initially, he started working in Seattle for a couple of different papers, and he did work off and on for the Industrial Worker when it was published out of Seattle. But his main career was drawing political cartoons for the Seattle Union Record, and he did a lot of those during that time. Be darned if we could find any information about him hardly at all. I think he had died by 1951, but with a name like Swenson, there are a couple of those. And of course, the Renaissance man of the IWW in the Pacific Northwest was a fellow by the name of Ralph Chaplin, who lived out the last part of his life in Tacoma. And was an important figure in the Washington Historical Society. And Ralph, to say that Ralph had multiple talents and gifts is to understate it by a lot. He did illustrations under the name of Bingo. And of course, he was the man who gave the word solidarity forever to the song that became the Wadley's anthem. This picture was taken when he was being booked into Leavenworth Penitentiary with the other IWW who were arrested because of what they believed and expressed. Actually, from people who knew him, he was about this unpleasant for the rest of his life. But then you do even 5 years in Leavenworth, it can ruin your day. He wrote a wonderful book about what it was to be a wobbly, or to be him and be a wobbly. And some of his work, his graphic work, represents the period so well. Again, he doesn't get credited all the time. You can see Bingo down there in the corner. That means it's the work of Ralph Chaplin. And
the message, fellow workers, remember, we are in here for you. You are out there for us. And of course, all those wobbly prisoners who were stuck in Leavenworth, I think even the government began to be a little ashamed about what they were doing there. Most of them didn't do the full sentences that were inflicted upon them. But art like this is so memorable from that era that he not only drove his point home, but he made everybody sort of understand what it is to sacrifice something for your beliefs and for the movement. He also was involved in something, an ingenious way of spreading the word and just being a nuisance, if you were wobbly. The stickerettes have kind of reappeared, little things, stamp-like size things that you could attach to things. So it was like kind of, instead of, they didn't have spray cans in those days, so if you wanted to gravitize something, you could use these little stickerettes instead. And some wonderful stuff. I don't know that all of it is directly Chaplin's, but we know that some of it is. And some of the images are very, very memorable. IWW is coming. See that industrial backdrop back there? Could be Everett, but it was really intended to be industrial landscapes, industrial cityscapes everywhere, not just in America, but all over the world. And of course, this wonderful clock with wooden shoes, sabots for sabotage, and the black cat representing the same thing. So what time is it? Time to organize. Organize now. Organize right. Remember, those were the final words of Joe Hill. Don't waste time in the morning. Organize. Big Bill Haywood's words about sabotage. To push back, pull out, or break off the fangs of the cavalry. But of course, perhaps the single most memorable accomplishment by Ralph Chapman from our standpoint today is a poem, just a very short little poem that he wrote on the wall of Cook County Jail back in Chicago when they had arrested a bunch of them before they started the show trials and the shipping of them all off to Leavenworth. More Not the Dead kind of hits directly at what the Everett Free Speech fight is about. It had a lot to do with what the Wobblies were about in the days when they were fighting town by town to knock down laws that made it impossible for the working man to stand on a soapbox and tell the community what he thought was dead wrong about what was going on in their town, in their mills, and in their country. It goes like this. Mourn not the dead that in the cool earth lie, dust unto dust. The calm, sweet earth that mothers all who die, as all men must. Mourn not your captive comrades who must dwell, too strong to strive, within each steel-bound coffin of a cell, buried alive. But rather mourn the apathetic throng, the cowed and the meek, who see the world's great anguish and its wrong and dare not speak. One of the people who was a fixture of the radical press in New York City for years and years, an illustrator of enormous talent, who did all sorts of different things, didn't get too much involved in specific propaganda art that related to Everett. He was pretty busy illustrating for a magazine called The Masses. Art Young, an amazing sense of humor, wicked sense of satire, and a man who knew all of the usual suspects that were involved in the IWW. So The Masses was regularly graced with illustrations by him, or covers by him, and Mr. Young did things like this one, fattened by the horrors of war. Yeah. And a hilarious wanted poster for Jesus Christ. Tell who the IWW were identifying with at that time. Unjustly accused, unjustly punished. And Art Young original. He still, I saw these on the posted places in New York City. I thought it was interesting. It's still alive and well after all these years. This wanted poster for Jesus still has its But he also did sketches at the show trials in Chicago before the IWW were shipped off to Leavenworth in large numbers, defended by George Vanderveer. There's a wonderful biography of George Vanderveer by Hawley and Potts that was published many, many years ago called Counsel for the Damned. And that's exactly what they called this gentleman, a defense attorney of great gifts who successfully defended Tom Tracy in the Everett trial, and then was not so successful with the group from Centralia, and then likewise not that successful defending the political prisoners after the First World War. But a wonderful, it was a predatory bird-like sort of visage here, sketch done by Art Young in 1918 during the trial. Love this with James Rowan. Rowan, in a subdued moment, perhaps thinking what 20 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary is going to be like. And of course, he's the person who came toe-to-toe with Sheriff McRae on a couple of occasions and was beaten so severely there at Beverly Park more than once. There's a photograph of it, Dr. Smith showing the wounds on his back. He was beaten out of Beverly Park. Feisty little guy, and this kind of pensive sketch by Art Young gives us a view of him that's is especially interesting value. And of course, James P. Thompson, the guy who led off the Spokane free speech fight, the guy who really led off the Everett free speech fight, whose oratory was legendary. Maybe one of the big problems that was also wonderful about what Doug was doing. Doug did a good job of beginning to catch that same sort of flavor of what that street speaking was all about, because the art of street corner oratory had a lot to do with what the IWW was all about. And one of the masters, the acknowledged masters of that was James Pearl Thompson, who died in Seattle in obscurity in the 1950s, but was the first guy pulled off the soapbox in Spokane, and was the guy that when Don McRae found out that he was destined to be speaking at Hewitt and Wetmore said, "That man will not speak in my town." Yeah, there you go. That's the thing we can't. The graphics survive, and other aspects of the wobbly magnetism survive. But the fact is, we don't really get to hear the oratory, and in many cases, that tells you so much. You remember back in 1976, the first time I participated in any kind of a voyage, and we came up from Seattle. And Jack Miller proceeded to give us a soapbox speech, standing on the ferry and addressing us as fellow workers, and making sure that we understood that by calling us that, he was conferring upon us an honor as great as if he were to call us his brothers. This was a moving moment. A very elderly gentleman who still had the fire and the passion of beliefs that had cost him dearly through his entire life. We still have a great body of material that helps us understand the fire, helps us understand the passion of the beliefs, and helps us look into what the IWW was bringing to bear to express the ideas that they wanted to express. The free speech issue was important here, among other things, because free speech, as practiced by the industrial workers of the world, was a powerful thing. And whether you're talking about their artists or their orators, it was not something to be taken lightly. It was designed to move you, designed to shake you, it was designed to reaffirm your confidence that industrial justice could be achieved. It just might cost you your life. We're busy, even as we speak, accumulating things and interpreting things that relate to the Everett Massacre. And we really thank you for coming, and hope that the outcome of this 100th will be that somehow or the other we actually enhance the meaning of the event. You or I will never remember an event we didn't witness, and we're lucky enough not to have participated in it. But if we can find some meaning in it, if we can understand or admire or feel close to the individuals that were involved, I think it gives it meaning. It gives us meaning. Excuse me. Thank you.